The evening breeze carried the scent of expensive perfume and freshly prepared seafood through the open windows of the Golden Plate restaurant. Lily adjusted her black apron and tucked a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. Her feet ached after 8 hours of running between tables, but she couldn't afford to show any signs of tiredness. The Thursday night crowd was always demanding, and tips from wealthy patrons were what kept her mother's medical bills at bay. Table 12 needs their check, and 14 just ordered another round of martinis, said Mike, the bartender, as Lily passed by with a tray of empty glasses. On it, she replied with a practiced smile that hid her exhaustion. At 28, this wasn't where Lily had imagined herself. 5 years ago, she had walked across the stage at Westwood Conservatory of Music, her piano performance degree, representing thousands of hours of practice and dedication. Her professors had called her a rare talent. Her family had beamed with pride. But then life happened, her mother's diagnosis, the mounting medical bills, and the harsh reality that extraordinary talent didn't automatically translate to steady income. So here she was, memorizing wine pairings instead of concertos. "Lily," called out Diane, the restaurant manager, "we need you to help with the private room. The Henderson party just got bigger, and Tanya can't handle it alone." Lily nodded and quickly made her way to the back of the restaurant, where a group of about 20 people occupied the exclusive dining area. She immediately noticed him. It was hard not to. Richard Blake, the tech entrepreneur whose face had been on the cover of business magazines and whose name frequently appeared in the city's society pages. His company had revolutionized some kind of software that Lily didn't fully understand, but what she did understand was that he was worth billions and was known to be an extremely generous tipper when impressed. "Good evening," she said, approaching a table of 4 men in expensive suits. "Can I get you started with some drinks?" One of the men, clearly not Blake but trying to impress him, ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than Lily's weekly rent. As she wrote down the order, she felt someone watching her. Looking up, she met Blake's intense gaze. He wasn't smiling, just studying her with the analytical expression of someone used to assessing value in everything. "You're new," he stated, rather than asked. "Just to this section, sir. I usually work the main dining room." Blake nodded, seemingly losing interest, and returned to his conversation about acquisition strategies and market projections. Lily moved efficiently between tables, taking orders, delivering drinks, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. As the night progressed, the private room grew louder with laughter and conversation. The wine flowed freely, and with it, the boundaries of professional behavior began to blur. One of Blake's associates made a comment about Lily's appearance that made her skin crawl, but she kept her composure. This wasn't the first time, and the rent was due next week. "I hear you're quite the pianist," a woman's voice said as Lily cleared some plates. Startled, Lily turned to see an elegant older woman with silver hair and kind eyes. She wore a simple, but obviously designer dress and had been sitting quietly at Blake's table earlier. "I'm sorry?" Lily asked, wondering how this woman could possibly know about her musical background. "Diane mentioned you studied at Westwood. My late husband was on the board there for many years. I always try to keep track of their graduates." The woman smiled warmly. "I'm Helen Porter." Recognition flickered in Lily's eyes. The Porter Concert Hall at Westwood was named after this woman's family. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Porter. Yes, I graduated 5 years ago. Piano performance." "And yet you're here," Mrs. Porter said, not unkindly but with genuine curiosity. Lily adjusted the plates on her tray. "Life took a different turn than expected. My mother got sick and—" She stopped herself, realizing this wasn't the place for personal stories. "I still play when I can." Mrs. Porter nodded understandingly. "Music never leaves us, even when circumstances pull us in different directions." Their conversation was interrupted by a loud crash from the main table. One of Blake's increasingly intoxicated friends had knocked over a glass, sending red wine across the pristine white tablecloth. "For God's sake, Greg," Blake said with obvious irritation. "That's a $3,000 bottle you just wasted." "I'll get that cleaned up right away," Lily said, already moving toward the mess. As she carefully blotted the tablecloth, trying to minimize the damage, she became aware that the men were discussing her. "Pretty little thing," said Greg, the wine spiller, not bothering to lower his voice. "But they're all the same in this city. Wannabe actresses and musicians serving tables while waiting for their big break." He laughed. Spoiler alert, it never comes. Blake's expression remained neutral, but his eyes flicked toward Lily to see if she had heard. She kept her gaze down, focusing on her task, years of practice allowing her to wear a mask of professional detachment. Actually, Mrs. Porter's clear voice cut through the chatter. This young woman is a Westwood graduate. Piano performance. The table fell silent as all eyes turned to Lily, who felt heat rising to her cheeks. Is that so? Blake asked, his interest seemingly piqued. And yet you're serving our dinner. There was no malice in his tone, just statement of fact, but it stung nonetheless. Yes, sir, Lily replied simply, finishing with the wine-soaked napkins. Well, Blake said, leaning back in his chair, the world is full of music school graduates waiting tables. Supply and demand, I suppose. His friends chuckled, and the conversation moved on. Lily excused herself to get fresh napkins, her face burning with a mixture of embarrassment and quiet anger. In the kitchen, she took a deep breath and reminded herself of why she was here. Her mother's medication cost $2,400 a month, and insurance only covered half. When she returned to the private room, the atmosphere had shifted. Mrs. Porter was saying her goodbyes, and Blake was standing to shake her hand. It was lovely seeing you, Richard, Mrs. Porter said. Don't forget what I mentioned about the foundation gala next month. We could use your support. I'll have my assistant send a donation, Blake replied with practiced charm. Actually, Mrs. Porter said with a smile that somehow felt like a challenge, I was hoping for more than just your money. Attendance would be appreciated. The arts need visible supporters, not just financial ones. Blake looked momentarily uncomfortable but nodded. I'll check my calendar. As Mrs. Porter prepared to leave, she stopped by Lily, who was arranging dessert menus. Don't let the music go, dear, she said quietly. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns, but talent finds its way. She pressed a business card into Lily's hand. Call my office sometime. I'd love to hear you play. Lily thanked her, tucking the card into her apron pocket, certain that she would never have the courage to use it. The party began to wind down around midnight. As Lily presented the considerable bill to Blake, he looked at her with renewed interest. Westwood, huh? He said, swiping his credit card without even glancing at the total. What was your specialty? Romantic and early 20th century composers, sir. Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Debussy. Impressive names to drop, he said with a hint of skepticism. I'm hosting an event at my home in 2 weeks. The staff company I use is looking for extra servers. The pay is excellent. He handed her a business card of his own. If you're interested, contact this number. Tell them I sent you. Lily took the card, surprised by the offer. Thank you, Mr. Blake. He signed the receipt, adding a tip that was generous but not extraordinary. Maybe you can tell me more about Rachmaninoff while you're there, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. After the party left, Lily sat down for the first time in hours, turning Blake's card over in her fingers. The pay would likely be exceptional, possibly enough to cover a full month of her mother's treatments. But something about Blake's manner made her uneasy. The way he had said, maybe you can tell me more about Rachmaninoff, felt like he was testing her, as if he didn't quite believe her background. Still, could she afford to turn down the opportunity? Her bank account was nearly empty, and her mother's next round of treatment was scheduled for the following week. When she finally got home to her small apartment at 2 a.m., Lily kicked off her shoes and massaged her aching feet. Her upright piano, the one luxury she had kept despite financial hardship, sat in the corner of her living room, sheet music still, open to the piece she had been working on during her precious few hours of free time. She sat down at the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. Without turning on the lights, guided only by the street lamp glow filtering through thin curtains, she began to play. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major flowed from her fingers, the gentle, melancholic melody filling the quiet apartment. As she played, Lily thought about Richard Blake and his world of wealth and power, so different from her own. She thought about Mrs. Porter's kindness and the business card now sitting on her kitchen counter. She thought about her mother, sleeping, peacefully for now in the bedroom, unaware of the financial struggles that kept her daughter awake at night. The music swelled beneath her fingers, each note a small act of defiance against the life that had forced her to set aside her dreams. For these few minutes, in the darkness of her apartment, she wasn't a waitress with aching feet and mounting bills. She was just a musician, speaking the language she knew best. When the final notes faded into silence, Lily made her decision. She would call the number on Blake's card tomorrow. Whatever his reasons for offering the job, she needed the money. And perhaps, in some small way, it would be a step back toward the world she had reluctantly left behind. What she couldn't possibly know was how that decision would change everything. The next morning, Lily sat at her small kitchen table, staring at Richard Blake's business card while her mother, Patricia, shuffled around making tea. The morning light cast a warm glow on the worn furniture, softening the edges of their modest apartment. "You're quiet today," Patricia said, placing a steaming mug in front of her daughter. Despite the illness that had thinned her frame and dulled her once vibrant red hair, Patricia's eyes remained sharp and observant. "Rough night at work?" Lily traced the embossed lettering on the card. "Actually, I got a job offer. Well, sort of." She explained about Richard Blake, the private party, and the potentially generous pay. She left out the condescending remarks and the uncomfortable way he had challenged her musical background. "It sounds like a good opportunity," Patricia said, lowering herself carefully into the chair opposite Lily. "But something's bothering you about it." Lily sighed. "I don't know. There was just something about the way he looked at me when I mentioned studying at Westwood. Like he didn't believe me." She shrugged. "But the pay would cover your next treatment with some left over." Patricia reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Lily, you've put your life on hold for 2 years because of me. I hate seeing you carry this burden. Mom, we've talked about this." I know," Patricia said with a gentle smile. "But I was your age once. I remember what it's like to have dreams, to have talent and nowhere to use it." She nodded toward the upright piano. "I heard you playing last night." "You still sound beautiful," Lily smiled. Her mother had been her first piano teacher, guiding her small hands over the keys before she could even read. It had been Patricia who had driven her to lessons twice a week, who had worked extra shifts as a nurse to pay for competitions and eventually conservatory applications. "I'm going to call them," Lily decided, picking up her phone. "We need the money and it's just one night." The call was brief and businesslike. The staffing coordinator confirmed that Mr. Blake had indeed requested her specifically, which surprised Lily. They agreed on a rate that was, as promised, excellent, almost triple what she would make during a regular dinner shift at the Golden Plate. The event was scheduled for the following Saturday, and she was to arrive 3 hours early for briefing and setup. The week passed quickly, filled with regular shifts at the restaurant and quiet evenings at home with her mother, whose good days were becoming less frequent. The piano remained mostly silent. Lily was too tired most nights to do more than run through a few scales to keep her fingers limber. Saturday arrived with unexpected nerves. Lily found herself changing outfits 3 times before settling on the required black pants and white button-up shirt that the staffing company had specified. She braided her hair neatly and applied minimal makeup, aiming for professional invisibility. "You look nice," Patricia said from the doorway of Lily's bedroom. She was having a good day, moving around with less pain than usual. "I look like every other server in the city," Lily replied, but she smiled at her mother's encouragement. "Call me when you're on your way home, no matter how late," Patricia insisted as Lily gathered her things. "And Lily, don't let anyone make you feel small. Not even billionaires." The address provided by the staffing company led Lily to an exclusive neighborhood overlooking the city. As the bus climbed higher into the hills, the houses grew larger and further apart. By the time she reached her stop, the properties were hidden behind high walls and security gates. Blake's home was a modern masterpiece of glass and stone, perched on the hillside like a geometric extension of the mountain itself. Lily approached the service entrance as instructed, where a security guard checked her name against a list before directing her to a staff area at the rear of the house. Inside, about a dozen other servers were already being briefed by an efficient woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Valerie, the event coordinator. "This is a small gathering by Mr. Blake's standards, only 50 guests," Valerie explained. "But they are all very important people in the tech and finance worlds. so everything must be perfect. She distributed floor plans and explained the flow of the evening: cocktails in the main living area, followed by a seated dinner in the glass-walled dining room, then back to the living area for drinks and networking. You, she said, pointing to Lily, are assigned to the living room for the entire event. Mr. Blake specifically requested you remain in that area. Lily nodded, wondering again why Blake had singled her out. The living room assignment was considered easier than the dining room, with less formal service required. As the staff finished their preparations, Lily took a moment to absorb her surroundings. The house was stunning, minimalist but warm, with natural materials and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed spectacular views of the city below. The living room featured a sunken seating area centered around a fireplace, with a sleek bar along one wall. But what immediately caught Lily's attention was the grand piano, a magnificent black Steinway, positioned near the windows where it would catch the last light of sunset. She found herself drawn to it, her fingers itching to feel the keys. It had been years since she had played on an instrument of this quality. At the conservatory, she had access to good pianos, but nothing like this, a concert grand worth more than she would earn in a decade. Beautiful, isn't it? A male voice said behind her. Lily turned to find Richard Blake watching her, dressed casually but expensively in dark jeans and a gray cashmere sweater. In the context of his home, he seemed more relaxed than he had at the restaurant, but no less intimidating. It's extraordinary, she admitted. Steinway Model D? A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Yes, you know your pianos. I told you I studied at Westwood. Right. Chopin and, what was it? Rachmaninoff. There was that testing tone again, as if he expected her to stumble. And Debussy, she added, meeting his gaze steadily. He studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the rest of the house. What do you think? The question caught her off guard. Wealthy people rarely ask service staff for their opinions on anything, let alone their homes. It's beautiful, she said honestly, the way it frames the landscape instead of competing with it. He nodded, seeming pleased with her observation. That was the architect's intent, to blur the boundary between inside and out. He glanced at his watch. Guests will be arriving soon. Valerie will tell you what needs to be done. With that, he walked away, leaving Lily with the distinct impression that she had passed some sort of test, though she wasn't sure what. The evening began smoothly. Guests arrived in expensive cars, greeted Blake with air kisses and firm handshakes, and dispersed throughout the living room with flutes of champagne. Lily moved efficiently between the kitchen and the main room, offering hors d'oeuvres and replacing empty glasses. The guests largely ignored her, their attention focused on networking and impressing each other with talk of investments and innovations. She recognized a few faces from business news and tech magazines. There was a famous venture capitalist who had backed several successful startups, a woman who had developed a revolutionary AI algorithm, and several other figures whose net worth probably equaled the GDP of a small country. She also spotted Helen Porter, the woman from the restaurant, who gave her a warm smile of recognition but didn't approach. As the evening progressed and the sky darkened outside the massive windows, the atmosphere grew more relaxed. The initial cocktail hour extended as Blake announced that dinner would be delayed due to some issue in the kitchen. More drinks were poured, voices grew louder, and Lily found herself increasingly busy. She was returning from the kitchen with a fresh tray of appetizers when she overheard Blake speaking to a group near the piano. Supposed to have live music, but the pianist canceled last minute. Some emergency. He sounded annoyed. Hard to find reliable people these days. Such a shame, said a woman in a red dress. That beautiful Steinway going to waste. I could play a little something, offered a balding man in his 60s. Had lessons as a boy? Blake laughed politely. Thanks, David, but I've heard you're playing at the club. I think we'll stick with the sound system. The group chuckled and Lily continued her circuit with the tray, keeping her expression neutral. She passed close to where Blake was standing, and to her surprise, he reached out and lightly touched her arm to stop her. Actually, he said, his voice carrying across the room in a way that made conversations pause, I believe we do have a pianist in our midst. He turned to Lily with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Our server here studied at Westwood Conservatory. Isn't that right? Lily felt the weight of sudden attention as heads turned toward her. The tray in her hand seemed to grow heavier. "Yes, that's right," she said quietly. "Westwood?" said the balding man, David, with raised eyebrows. "That's a serious program." "Indeed," Blake agreed. "So perhaps she might favor us with a demonstration of her skills." He gestured toward the piano. The invitation, if it could be called that, hung in the air. Lily realized with a sinking feeling that this had been his plan all along. Not a test, but a setup. He wanted to embarrass her, to catch her in a lie or prove that her education had been wasted. He didn't believe she could play, or at least not at the level Westwood demanded of its graduates. "I'm working, Mr. Blake," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Consider it part of your duties for the evening," he replied smoothly. "I'm sure everyone would enjoy some live music while we wait for dinner to be ready." There was no graceful way to refuse. If she tried, she would appear unprofessional and possibly lose the job, and the money she desperately needed. If she played poorly, she would confirm Blake's apparent suspicion that she was exaggerating her credentials. Lily set down her tray on a nearby table. The room had gone quiet, all eyes on the unexpected drama unfolding. She saw Helen Porter watching with concern, clearly aware of what Blake was doing. A few guests looked uncomfortable, others curious, and some seemed to share Blake's barely concealed amusement at the prospect of the server being put in her place. As she walked toward the piano, Lily's mind raced. She hadn't performed in public for nearly 2 years. Her practice time had been limited to late nights when her fingers were already tired from carrying trays. The Steinway would respond differently than her worn upright at home. But as she approached the magnificent instrument, something else stirred within her. Pride, yes, but also love for the music that had been her constant companion since childhood. This arrogant man thought he could use her passion to humiliate her. Instead, she would use it to remind herself and everyone in this room of who she really was. Lily sat down at the bench, adjusted it to her height, and placed her hands on the cool, smooth keys. She took a deep breath and looked up to find Blake watching her with that same skeptical expression. In that moment, she made her choice. She would not play something simple to merely prove she could manage the basics. No, if this was to be a test, then she would demonstrate exactly what a Westwood graduate could do. Her fingers poised above the keys, ready to begin. The room fell silent as Lily closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The weight of 50 stairs pressed against her back, but as her fingers touched the keys, the world around her began to fade. She started with a gentle, hesitant touch, as if reintroducing herself to an old friend. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor began to fill the room. The opening notes were deceptively simple, a question posed to the universe. Lily had chosen this piece deliberately. It started accessibly enough but would build to showcase technical brilliance and emotional depth. It was a piece that had won her accolades at Westwood, one that lived in her muscle memory despite the years away from serious practice. As the familiar melody flowed from her fingers, Lily felt a rush of emotions, nostalgia for the hours spent perfecting each phrase, regret for the dreams she had set aside, and a fierce joy at reuniting with music at this level. The Steinway responded to her touch with a warmth and resonance her old upright could never produce, each note ringing clear and true through Blake's modernist living room. Behind her, she heard a soft gasp as the piece began to build in complexity. The initial gentleness gave way to cascading arpeggios and bold chords. Her hands moved with increasing confidence across the keyboard, muscle memory awakening fully now. This was where many amateur pianists would falter. But Lily's fingers danced through the technical challenges with precision, born of thousands of hours of practice. She risked opening her eyes briefly and caught a glimpse of Blake's face. His smug expression had vanished, replaced by genuine surprise. Next to him, Helen Porter was smiling knowingly. Other guests had stopped their conversations entirely. Cocktail glasses paused halfway to lips, all attention now focused on the unexpected performance unfolding before them. Lily closed her eyes again and surrendered completely to the music. The middle section of the ballade grew stormy, reflecting the emotional turmoil Chopin had poured into the piece. Lily's hands crossed and recrossed, her right hand climbing to the highest registers while her left provided a thunderous foundation. The contrast between delicate melodies and powerful chords created a dramatic tension that filled the room. As she navigated the most technically demanding passage, a series of rapid descending runs that required perfect timing and control, She felt something unlock within her. This was who she was meant to be. Not a server carrying trays, but this, a vessel for something beautiful and profound. For these few minutes, financial worries, her mother's illness, Blake's condescension, all of it fell away, leaving only the conversation between her soul and Chopin's. The final section of the ballade approached, with its famously difficult coda. Lily's tempo increased, her dynamics growing more intense. Her fingers flew across the keys with passionate precision. The piece reached its climactic conclusion with powerful octaves and a final descending scale that seemed to search for resolution before finding it in the last, definitive chord. The final note hung in the air for a long moment. Lily's hands remained poised above the keys, her breathing quick but controlled. The silence that followed was complete. Not even the clink of a glass or whispered comment broke the spell she had cast. Then someone began to clap. It was Helen Porter, rising from her seat with tears in her eyes. One by one, others joined her until the room erupted in enthusiastic applause. Some guests were standing, their faces reflecting astonishment and admiration. Even David, the balding man who had offered to play earlier, was nodding with professional respect. Lily turned on the bench to face the room, her cheeks flushed. Her eyes found Blake, who stood motionless, his expression unreadable. Their gazes locked for a moment before he slowly joined the applause, a complex mix of emotions crossing his face. Surprise, certainly, but also something that might have been shame. As the applause began to subside, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair approached the piano. Lily recognized him immediately. Thomas Reynolds, the music director of the city's symphony orchestra. His presence at a tech industry gathering was unexpected, but Blake's parties were known for their eclectic guest lists. That was extraordinary, Reynolds said, his voice carrying the authority of decades in the classical music world. Absolutely extraordinary. I haven't heard the G minor ballade played with such understanding in years. He extended his hand. Thomas Reynolds. And you are? Lily Chen, she replied, taking his hand with fingers still warm from playing. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Reynolds. I've attended many of your concerts. Where did you study? He asked, though the look in his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. Westwood Conservatory. I graduated 5 years ago. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. Under Professor Harlow, I presume. That phrasing in the development section had his influence written all over it. Lily smiled, surprised and pleased by his perception. Yes, he was my primary instructor for 3 years. And what have you been doing since graduation? Teaching, performing? His eyes were kind but penetrating, seeing through any pretense. Lily hesitated, aware that the room was still listening. Life took an unexpected turn. My mother became ill, and I've been working to support her medical care. She gestured to her server's uniform. This pays the bills more reliably than concert fees, at least at my level. Reynolds nodded with understanding rather than pity. Music is a demanding mistress, both artistically and economically. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. I would very much like to continue this conversation. We should discuss your future plans. Lily took the card, her hand trembling slightly. Thank you, she managed, unsure what else to say. Reynolds smiled. No, thank you. You've turned what was becoming a rather tedious evening into something memorable. He glanced toward Blake. Sometimes beauty appears in the most unexpected places. As Reynolds moved away, other guests approached to offer compliments. Some asked about her background, while others simply wanted to express their appreciation. One woman, the AI developer Lily had recognized earlier, spoke of how the performance had moved her to tears, reminding her of concerts her grandmother had taken her to as a child. Through it all, Lily maintained her composure, thanking each person graciously while trying to process what had just happened. This sudden attention from people who had been ignoring her all evening felt surreal. Eventually, Valerie appeared at her side. Mr. Blake says you're relieved of your serving duties for the rest of the evening, she said, her businesslike tone at odds with the admiration in her eyes. He's asked that you join the guests for dinner if you'd like. Lily blinked in surprise. Join them? But I'm staff, not tonight, apparently, Valerie replied with a small smile. Tonight, you're the entertainment that saved his party. And possibly more, from the way Reynolds was talking to you. Lily glanced around and spotted Blake watching her from across the room. When their eyes met, he raised his glass in a subtle toast. She wasn't sure if it was an apology or an acknowledgement, but either way, Something had shifted between them. "I should get back to work," Lily said, uncomfortable with the idea of suddenly changing roles. "Blake insists," Valerie said firmly. "And between us, you don't want to refuse when he insists. It's a compliment, take it." She gestured toward a server carrying a tray of champagne. "Have a drink. Dinner will be announced in 15 minutes. Left alone for the first time since her performance, Lily took a moment to catch her breath. She accepted a glass of champagne but didn't drink it immediately, instead using it as a prop to steady her hands, which were still buzzing with adrenaline and muscle memory. She felt out of place among these wealthy, powerful people. Yet the music had temporarily elevated her to their level. It was a strange sensation, being seen, truly seen after years of invisibility. Her thoughts turned to her mother. What would Patricia say if she could see her daughter now, being celebrated by the kind of people who usually looked right through her? She would be proud, certainly, but also worried about Lily getting her hopes up only to be disappointed again. "That was quite the performance," said a familiar voice behind her. Lily turned to find Richard Blake standing there, looking more humble than she had yet seen him. His usual confidence seemed tempered by genuine respect. "Thank you," she said simply. "I owe you an apology," he said, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I invited you here under false pretenses. I thought—" He paused, looking uncomfortable. "I assumed you were exaggerating your credentials. That happens a lot in my world." "And in mine," Lily replied. "The difference is when it happens in your world, people usually get away with it." Blake laughed, a real laugh this time, not the controlled chuckle he had used with his friends. "Touché." He studied her with new interest. "Why are you serving tables with that kind of talent?" The question was blunt but not unkind. Lily considered deflecting but decided on honesty. "My mother has a rare form of cancer. The treatments are expensive and our insurance doesn't cover all of it. Music is beautiful, but it doesn't pay consistently unless you reach a certain level. I had to choose between pursuing uncertain success or making sure my mother got the care she needed." Blake nodded slowly, processing this information. Reynolds seemed impressed. "He doesn't impress easily." "I noticed," Lily said, allowing herself a small smile. "He's something of a legend." "He's on the board of several arts foundations," Blake said thoughtfully. "Including mine, though I must admit I established it more for the tax benefits than genuine passion for classical music." His candor was surprising. "Perhaps I've been undervaluing what it supports." Before Lily could respond, Valerie appeared to announce that dinner was served. Blake offered his arm with an old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with his modern surroundings. "Shall we? You're seated at my table," Reynolds insisted, as Lily allowed herself to be led toward the dining room. Still in her server's uniform but now walking as a guest, she felt as though she had stepped into someone else's life. The evening had begun with humiliation as Blake's intent, yet it had transformed into something entirely different. What waited at the dinner table and beyond remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, possibilities seemed to be opening rather than closing. Her fingers still carried the memory of the Steinways' touch, and Thomas Reynolds' card rested in her pocket like a talisman. Perhaps, Lily thought as she entered the glittering dining room, some dreams weren't meant to be abandoned after all, merely delayed until the right moment, and perhaps that moment had finally arrived. Dinner at Richard Blake's table was unlike anything Lily had experienced before. Crystal glasses caught the light from modern chandeliers overhead, and conversations flowed as smoothly as the expensive wine being poured. Lily sat between Thomas Reynolds and Helen Porter, with Blake directly across from her. The transition from server to guest still felt dreamlike, especially as she watched other staff members, people who had been her colleagues just an hour ago, now serving her. "Tell me about your mother's condition," Blake said during a lull in the conversation. His tone was different now, genuinely interested rather than probing for weakness. Lily took a sip of water before answering. "It's a rare form of lymphoma. The standard treatments weren't effective, so she's on an experimental protocol. It's showing promise, but it's expensive," Blake finished for her. "Very." Lily didn't elaborate. These people lived in a world where money solved problems. They couldn't understand the constant mathematical calculations that governed her life, weighing the cost of her mother's medication against rent, food, and utilities. Reynolds set down his fork. The financial challenges for artists in this country are shameful. Europe does a much better job supporting cultural pursuits. He turned to Lily. In my younger days, I saw many promising careers derailed by practical concerns. Including yours? Lily asked, curious about the renowned conductor's path. Reynolds smiled. No, I was fortunate. My family had means. He glanced at Blake. Not everyone is so lucky, which is why patronage remains vital to the arts. Blake nodded thoughtfully. I've always seen my foundation as more of a tax strategy than a calling. Perhaps that needs to change. Helen Porter raised an eyebrow. I've been telling you that for years, Richard. The conversation shifted to broader topics. The upcoming symphony season, the city's cultural landscape, the intersection of technology and art. Lily contributed when she could, surprised to find herself holding her own among these accomplished people. Her education at Westwood had prepared her for more than just playing the piano. It had given her a foundation in music history, theory, and appreciation that now allowed her to speak with confidence. As the dinner plates were cleared, Reynolds leaned closer to Lily. I wasn't merely being polite earlier, he said quietly. I'd like to discuss some possibilities with you. Would you be available to come to my office next week? Lily's heart raced. Of course, but what kind of possibilities? Several, Reynolds replied. For one, the symphony has an opening in our community outreach program. The pay isn't spectacular, but it's steady, and it includes health benefits. He paused. And there are other opportunities for someone with your talents. Audition spots, teaching positions at the conservatory. I haven't played seriously in 2 years, Lily admitted. What you heard tonight, I'm not sure I could maintain that level consistently. You'd be surprised how quickly it comes back with proper practice time, Reynolds said. The fundamentals are clearly there. The rest is just a matter of rebuilding your stamina and repertoire. Before Lily could respond, Blake stood and tapped his glass with a spoon. The dining room fell silent. Before we move back to the living room for coffee, I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight, he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the table. And I'd like to extend a special thanks to Lily Chen, who provided us with an unexpected but extraordinary musical interlude. All eyes turned to Lily, who felt her cheeks warm. Those of you who know me well, Blake continued. I know that I rarely admit when I'm wrong, but tonight I was wrong about something important. He looked directly at Lily. I made assumptions based on appearance and circumstance, rather than seeing the person before me. It's a mistake I won't make again. A murmur of approval rippled through the guests. Blake raised his glass. To hidden talents and second chances. The toast was echoed around the table. As glasses were lowered, Blake added, and to put action behind my words, I'd like to announce that the Blake Foundation will be establishing a new program to support musicians facing financial hardships, particularly those caring for family members with medical needs. Lily nearly dropped her glass. The announcement was clearly aimed at her situation, but its implications went far beyond her personal circumstances. She caught Helen Porter's eye across the table. The older woman gave her a subtle nod of approval. As the party moved back to the living room for coffee and dessert, Lily found herself in a daze. The evening had transformed from a potential humiliation to something that might actually change her life. She stood apart from the crowd for a moment, needing space to process everything that had happened. Overwhelming, isn't it? Blake had appeared beside her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. A bit, she admitted. This morning I was worried about making rent. Now possibilities are opening up, Blake finished. Reynolds doesn't offer meetings lightly. If he sees something in you, it's real. Lily studied the tech billionaire's face. Why the foundation announcement? You barely know me. Blake looked out over the city lights visible through his wall of windows. Let's just say you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. He paused. My younger sister was a musician, a violinist. Promising, like you. She got sick during her final year at Juilliard. Cancer. My family had money, so she got the best care, but... He trailed off. She didn't make it. I've often wondered what she might have become if she'd had more time. The personal revelation surprised Lily. Blake had seemed so one-dimensional earlier. Just another wealthy, entitled man. Now she glimpsed the complexity beneath the surface. I'm sorry about your sister, she said simply. Blake nodded. The foundation program isn't just for you. But you were the catalyst. Sometimes we need to be reminded of what matters. He straightened, his moment of vulnerability passing. I should get back to my guests. But we'll talk more about the details later. As Blake moved away, Lily found herself approached by other guests. Some offered business cards and vague promises of connections. Others simply wanted to compliment her playing again. Through it all, she maintained a gracious demeanor while inwardly trying to sort through which opportunities were genuine and which were merely the fleeting generosity of the wealthy when momentarily moved. Near the end of the evening, as guests began to depart, Lily found herself back at the piano. No one had asked her to play again, but she felt drawn to the instrument that had changed the course of her evening, perhaps the course of her life. She sat on the bench and placed her fingers lightly on the keys, not playing, just feeling their cool smoothness. The room had emptied somewhat, with only a few small groups of people still engaged in conversation. One more? It was Helen Porter, approaching with a warm smile. I don't want to impose, Lily said. My dear, after that Chopin, you could play all night and no one would consider it an imposition. Helen sat in a chair near the piano. Something gentler this time, perhaps? Debussy? Lily smiled. How did you know? You mentioned him that night at the restaurant. Besides, I have a good ear for matching musicians to composers. You have Chopin's fire, but I suspect Debussy's impressionism suits another side of your musical personality. Impressed by the older woman's perception, Lily began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune. The dreamy, impressionistic piece floated through the room like moonlight on water. This time she played not to prove anything, but simply for the joy of making music on a magnificent instrument. As the final gentle chords faded, Lily noticed that conversations had stopped again. Even the servers had paused in their cleanup duties to listen. Blake stood in the doorway, a contemplative expression on his face. Beautiful, Helen said softly. You know, I sit on several arts boards myself. Between Reynolds, Blake, and me, I think we might be able to create something meaningful for you. Why would you all do this for me? Lily asked, genuinely puzzled by the sudden interest in her welfare. Helen patted her hand. Talent like yours doesn't come along every day, and when it does, those of us who care about the arts have a responsibility to nurture it. She stood up. Call Reynolds on Monday, and call me on Tuesday. My number is on the back of that card I gave you at the restaurant. As the last guest departed, Lily found herself unsure of her role. Was she still staff expected to help with cleanup? Or a guest free to leave? She hovered uncertainly near the piano until Valerie approached. Mr. Blake asked me to arrange a car to take you home, the event coordinator said. It's waiting whenever you're ready. Oh, that's not necessary, Lily began. I can take the bus, he insists, Valerie said with a smile. And he'd like you to take this. She handed Lily an envelope. What is it? Your payment for the evening, plus what he called a performance bonus. He also said to tell you he'll be in touch about the foundation program once he's worked out the details. Lily took the envelope, feeling its weight. Thank you, and please thank him for me. As she gathered her few belongings, Blake himself appeared. All set? He asked. Yes, and thank you for everything. The ride home, the bonus, the foundation idea. It's all very generous, Blake shook his head. It's not generosity. It's correction. I misjudged you and tried to use your talent to embarrass you. Instead, you showed everyone, including me, what real excellence looks like. He extended his hand. I look forward to seeing where your path leads from here. Lily shook his hand, still somewhat dazed by the evening's turn of events. So do I. The car Blake had arranged was a luxury sedan with soft leather seats and a respectfully quiet driver. As it pulled away from the hillside mansion, Lily looked back at the gleaming structure with its walls of glass reflecting the night sky. Just hours ago, she had arrived as a server, invisible to the powerful people gathering inside. She was leaving as something else, not quite one of them, but no longer unseen. She opened the envelope Valerie had given her. Inside was far more than the agreed-upon payment, enough to cover several months of her mother's treatments. Attached was a note in bold handwriting. Consider this the first grant from the Blake Foundation Musicians Relief Fund. More to follow. R.B. tears welled in Lily's eyes as the implications sank in. Her mother could focus on healing without the stress of financial worry. Lily herself could begin practicing seriously again, rebuilding the technical skills that had grown rusty from disuse. And with Reynolds' offer of a meeting, there might be a path back to the musical career she had reluctantly abandoned. As the car descended from the hills toward her modest neighborhood, Lily felt as though she were traveling between two worlds, the rarefied air of wealth and privilege she had glimpsed tonight, and the practical struggles of her daily existence. She wasn't sure yet how to bridge those worlds or if she even should try. But one thing was certain: the music that had always lived inside her, even during the hardest times, had finally been heard. And sometimes being truly heard is the first step toward being understood. The car turned onto her street, and Lily's thoughts turned to her mother, waiting up despite the late hour, eager to hear about the evening. How could she possibly explain everything that had happened? Where would she even begin? With the truth, she decided, that sometimes life takes unexpected turns, that sometimes people surprise you, both the wealthy and entitled and yourself, and that sometimes when you least expect it, the thing you thought was lost forever finds its way back to you, changed but familiar, like a melody you've always known by heart. 2 years had passed since that fateful night at Richard Blake's mansion. Lily stood in the wings of the concert hall, heart pounding as she listened to the rustling of the audience settling into their seats. She smoothed the fabric of her black evening gown, a far cry from the server's uniform she had worn that night, and took deep, calming breaths. Nervous? Thomas Reynolds appeared beside her, distinguished in his conductor's tuxedo. Terrified, Lily admitted with a small laugh. But ready, Reynolds smiled. You've put in the work. Now trust it. He checked his watch. 5 minutes. I should get to the podium. As he walked away, Lily reflected on the whirlwind journey that had brought her to this moment. Her debut as a featured soloist with the City Symphony, performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. The piece was notoriously difficult, demanding both technical precision and emotional depth. 2 years ago, she could never have imagined herself here. The Monday after Blake's party, she had indeed called Reynolds' office as he had suggested. That meeting had led to a part-time position with the Symphony's community outreach program, teaching music to children in underserved schools. The regular hours and health benefits had been life-changing, allowing her to quit her restaurant job and devote more time to practicing. Blake had followed through on his promise as well. The Musicians' Relief Fund had become a reality within weeks, providing stipends to talented musicians facing financial hardships due to family medical situations. Lily had been the first recipient, receiving enough support to cover her mother's treatments entirely. Patricia had responded well to the experimental protocol, and 6 months ago had been declared in remission. Helen Porter had become a mentor and friend, introducing Lily to key figures in the city's cultural scene and inviting her to perform at smaller, private events where she gradually rebuilt her confidence and repertoire. Those performances had led to positive reviews in local arts publications, which in turn opened more doors. But it was Lily's own dedication that had truly transformed her playing. With financial pressures eased, she had been able to practice 4 to 6 hours daily, rebuilding the technical facility that had once made her a standout at Westwood. Under the guidance of Reynolds and other mentors, her musicality had deepened, informed now by life experiences that gave emotional weight to her interpretations. The orchestra began tuning, pulling Lily back to the present moment. She peeked through the curtain and scanned the nearly full concert hall. In the front row sat her mother, looking healthier than she had in years alongside Helen Porter. A few seats away was Richard Blake, who had become an unlikely ally in her career renaissance. Behind them, Lily spotted former co-workers from the Golden Plate, who had cheered her on every step of the way. The house lights dimmed, and applause rippled through the audience as Reynolds took the stage. He bowed briefly before turning to the orchestra, raising his baton, and launching into the evening's first piece. Lily stepped back from the curtain and closed her eyes, mentally reviewing the concerto she would perform after intermission. The sweeping melodies and thunderous climaxes played through her mind as she visualized her fingers moving across the keyboard. This was a piece she had dreamed of performing since her conservatory days, but back then, she hadn't possessed the emotional maturity to truly understand its depths. Life had given her that understanding. The struggle, the setbacks, the moments of despair, and ultimately the unexpected second chance. All of it had prepared her to communicate the journey embedded in Rachmaninoff's music. The concerto had been written after a period of deep depression for the composer, marking his triumphant return to music. Lily could relate to that narrative arc in a way her younger self never could have. Intermission arrived too quickly. As stagehands moved the grand piano into position, Lily's hands grew cold with nervousness. She rubbed them together, trying to warm her fingers. "You've got this," said a familiar voice. Lily turned to find Richard Blake approaching, looking somewhat out of place backstage but carrying himself with his usual confidence. "I hope so," she replied. "There are a lot of people out there, including about 50 kids from the outreach program," Blake said with a smile. They've been talking about Ms. Lily's big concert for weeks. That knowledge both increased her nerves and calmed them. Those children, many of whom had never considered classical music relevant to their lives before the program, were counting on her to show them what was possible. "How's your mother?" Blake asked, clearly trying to distract her from her nerves. "Good, really good. The doctors are optimistic about her staying in remission." Lily paused. "I never properly thanked you, you know." "For everything." Blake shook his head. "No thanks needed. The foundation has now helped 27 musicians in similar situations. Your story inspired something important." He glanced toward the stage. "I should get back to my seat. But I wanted to say break a leg." He hesitated, then added, "My sister would have been about your age. I think she would have approved of how things turned out." As he walked away, Lily felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her journey wasn't just about her own ambitions anymore. It represented something larger: the value of second chances, the importance of removing financial barriers to artistic pursuit, the power of music to bridge different worlds. The stage manager approached. "2 minutes, Miss Chen." Lily nodded and took her position at the entrance to the stage. The audience's applause washed over her as she walked out, the bright lights momentarily blinding. She bowed to the audience, then to Reynolds and the orchestra, before settling at the piano bench and adjusting it to her preferred height. She placed her hands on the keys, waiting for Reynolds's cue. When it came, she began the famous opening chords that introduced the concerto: dark, resonant, building in intensity like gathering storm clouds. The orchestra joined her, and together they embarked on the musical journey Rachmaninoff had mapped out a century earlier. As she played, Lily entered that transcendent state where technical concerns fell away, and only the music remained. Her fingers found each note with precision, while her mind and heart focused on the emotional story being told. The first movement's turbulent passages reflected struggle and determination. The second movement's lyrical theme spoke of hope and tender possibility. The final movement's triumphant conclusion celebrated resilience and renewal. Throughout the performance, the connection between Lily, the orchestra, and Reynolds felt electric. They breathed together, phrases flowing seamlessly between piano and ensemble. In the most demanding passages, Lily's years of training carried her through, while in the expressive sections, she drew on her life experiences to imbue each note with meaning. When the final chords resounded through the hall, there was a moment of complete silence before the audience erupted into applause. Reynolds extended his hand to Lily, inviting her to stand. As she rose and faced the audience, she saw people on their feet throughout the concert hall. Her mother was crying openly, her face radiant with pride. Helen Porter was beaming, applauding enthusiastically. Blake stood with a look of satisfaction, as if witnessing the successful completion of an important project. And scattered throughout the audience were the children from the outreach program, jumping up and down with excitement at seeing their teacher on the grand stage. Reynolds gestured for Lily to take a solo bow. As she did, a stagehand appeared with a bouquet of flowers. The applause continued, washing over her in waves. She had dreamed of this moment during those long nights practicing in her tiny apartment, but the reality was sweeter than she could have imagined. After several curtain calls, Lily finally exited the stage, her heart full. In the green room, congratulations poured in from orchestra members and music critics. Reynolds announced that the performance would likely be released as part of the symphony's seasonal recording, her debut album of sorts. Later, at the reception following the concert, Lily found herself surrounded by well-wishers from all parts of her life: former professors from Westwood, colleagues from the outreach program, friends from her restaurant days, and new connections from the music world. Her mother stayed close by her side, accepting congratulations from strangers who had no idea of the journey they had traveled together. Quite a change from serving drinks at my party, Blake said, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to Lily. I was just thinking the same thing, she replied. Life can change direction so quickly. Sometimes it needs a push, Blake said, glancing toward Reynolds, who was deep in conversation with a music critic. But the talent was always there. It just needed the right conditions to flourish. They were joined by Helen Porter, who embraced Lily warmly. Magnificent, my dear. Absolutely magnificent. What happens next? Blake asked, genuinely curious. More concerts? Recording? Lily smiled. All of that, I hope, but also continuing with the outreach program. Those kids. She looked across the room to where several students from her classes were awkwardly navigating the formal reception in their best clothes, clearly out of their element but determined to support their teacher. They remind me every day why music matters. Speaking of the program, Helen said, the board voted yesterday to expand it to 3 more schools next year. We'll need an assistant director. She raised an eyebrow at Lily. Someone who understands both the artistic and practical challenges. Are you offering me a job? Lily asked, surprised. I'm suggesting a path, Helen replied. One where you can both perform and help create opportunities for others. As the conversation continued, Lily felt a deep sense of contentment. Her life had found a balance she once thought impossible, pursuing her art at the highest level while also helping others discover their own creative potential. The financial security that had once seemed out of reach now allowed her to focus on what truly mattered. When the reception finally ended, Lily and her mother walked out of the concert hall together. The spring night was mild, stars visible despite the city lights. They paused on the steps, looking back at the illuminated building with its classic facade and imposing columns. Your father would have been so proud, Patricia said softly, naming the man who had first placed Lily's small hands on piano keys decades ago. I think he would, Lily agreed. Not just of tonight, but of everything. How we got through the hard times, how we never completely gave up. And how one moment can change everything, Patricia added. That night at Blake's party. Lily nodded, remembering the fear and humiliation she had felt when first commanded to play, followed by the liberation of surrendering to the music. It wasn't just luck, though. It was being prepared when opportunity arrived. They began walking toward the parking garage where Lily's modest but reliable car was parked, another change from the days of bus, rides and worn-out shoes. So, Ms. Soloist, Patricia said with a smile, where do we go from here? Lily looked up at the night sky, considering the question. 2 years ago, she had been carrying trays and counting tips, her dreams packed away like the sheet music gathering dust on her shelves. Now those dreams had not only been revived, but had evolved into something richer and more meaningful than her younger self could have imagined. Forward, she said simply. We go forward. And as they walked arm in arm through the city streets, the echoes of Rachmaninoff's triumphant conclusion seemed to follow them. A soundtrack to a story still unfolding, one of talent recognized, of kindness repaid, of music's power to transform not just listeners but lives.